that little button that comes on, but I definitely see it. So I think we're live right now. So.
Yeah, it popped up for me. So
Oh, does it? Okay.
Everybody's seeing us right now. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Man, it's too late, and this is like week 3 for me, so I'm already like loopy. I'm slap happy from the work week. That could either make for a really good episode or a really bad one.
It's gonna be
probably a little bit of both.
A little bit of both. You take the good, you take the bad. Oh God, we're singing songs now. That's the facts of life right there. Okay.
All right, we're gonna get this started. Welcome to AOE Live, episode number 13. We are recording this show live on Tuesday, September 8th. Sarah Dougherty, a visual arts curriculum coordinator and turnaround oats program coordinator for the Des Moines Public School, is going to drop in for a chat. She will share expertise on all things grading and assessment and how we can work toward taming the grading game. We will also ask her about the Turnaround Arts Initiative, arts integration, and the one time she got to talk to Chuck Close. My name is Tim Bogatz, a high school art teacher from Omaha, Nebraska.
Hey everybody, and I'm Andrew McCormick, and I'm a middle school and high school art teacher in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And many of you will recognize Sarah as a former writer for the Art of Ed and a former instructor for some AOE classes. She is currently the Visual Arts Curriculum Director for the Des Moines Public Schools in Des Moines, Iowa. And she just absolutely loves talking about standards-based grading. And tonight we're really going to pick her brain and get a few ideas for teachers that you guys can take back to the art room. So Sarah, thanks for joining us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. We want to say hello to our listeners and those of you that are watching live. For those of you watching on Crowdcast, why don't you tell us, what are your biggest issues with grading?
Yep, we definitely want to hear from you, so you can chat us up at the AOE Live page and ask questions kind of to Sarah, or we can kind of filter it and ask her. Make sure you use the hashtag AOE Live on Twitter. We've got our Crowdcast up, so you can upvote some questions so we can kind of see what's hot and make sure that we try to get those. So, as always, it's just a really great way to participate with the show.
And as we always do, once we're done tonight, the podcast will be available on the AOE Live page and up later this week on iTunes and Stitcher. Listen to it on your drive to work, at home in the evening, or even during your plan time.
All right, so Sarah, we've been talking a lot about you and the show, and we're finally going to get to ask you some questions. So, can you tell us what exactly it is that you do as the Visual Arts Curriculum Coordinator, and also your involvement with the Turnaround Arts Program and being the coordinator for that?
Sure. So as the Visual Arts Curriculum Coordinator, my job is to coordinate the visual arts curriculum, instruction, and assessment for our about 80 art teachers in Des Moines and 33,000 students who take classes in the visual arts. My job is to do curriculum assessment to support teachers in rigorous and meaningful instruction, and just generally be the art department kind of representative for all things in the District of Des Moines. As the Turnaround Arts Program Coordinator, I get the coolest job in the world. I get to help 5 and hopefully more in the near future schools on the north side of Des Moines affect change in climate and culture and student performance through arts integration and using the arts as leverage to maximize student and family success in our schools. So that's kind of my everyday.
Wow, so that sounds really intriguing. How long has Des Moines been involved with the Turnaround Arts Program?
Yeah, so right now we are on the second year of our second cohort. So 4 years ago, Findlay got involved. It's a school on the north side of Des Moines, a small elementary school that was originally a PLAS school, persistently low achieving. It was in the bottom 5% of our state, and so it received school improvement grant, SIG funding as it's sometimes called, and they had to undertake a turnaround model, and so they had to submit a plan, and during that time, the Turnaround Arts Program was getting underway through the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. And Findlay applied because we had some really forward-thinking district administrators, and my new principal in that building, it came across her desk and she thought, wow, this would be a great way for us to turn our school around. Even great, I don't know that a lot of administrators would offer the art and music teacher a sub to write a grant together or to write an application for a program like this. Mine did. And so Findlay was selected as one of the 8 original national pilot schools. And because we saw such incredible success at Findlay, that cohort was expanded to the additional 3 other elementaries and 1 middle school. And that's where we're at right now, year 2 of the second cohort. So it's expanding quickly, it seems.
So, to get really specific into it, because you kind of told us like how you guys got involved and what year you're on. What are some of the aims of the program, and like, are there sort of, how do I say this, like kind of roadblocks or road checks along the way to kind of like see how you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not a grant program, and I think that's really important to understand. It's a program of support, and it's meant to really be a catalyst for wider change in our schools. We really focus on a couple of things. One, we use arts, and I say not just visual arts, but the arts in general, as a wrench to affect wider change and to improve things like student academic success, parental involvement, things like attendance even. But we also recognize the value in the arts for art's sake, and so we want to make sure that kids are also getting a standard sequential curriculum in the visual arts and in music and in drama delivered by a certified expert in that field. There are some checks along the way, both locally and nationally. Locally, I perform checks at our schools. We do an assessment of how things are going in all of those measures, things like attendance, things like behavior referral rates. But then there's also some national things that we adhere to. We do some surveying. We were partnered with the University of Chicago, and we did some metrics through them, but we've had some other partners to help us measure along the way, and not just those quantitative measures either, qualitative measures like parent interviews and student work samples, things like that give us a better picture of the entire program, and we try to keep that up regularly, things that schools haven't really done in the past, like measure attendance at an arts event versus attendance at a non-arts event, and what can we do to raise those numbers in our non-arts events, or how can we bring arts to all of our events, because we know that's what brings people in the door. Measuring also kind of a needs-based thing as part of our sort of our road checks. What are our needs? Are they changing, and how are we addressing them through the arts? So I'll throw out an example right there. We knew that in some of our schools, people were coming to their kids' concerts. They might not show up for parent-teacher conferences, and they might not update their cell phone number with the front office, right? We've all had to call and got that this number is not, it's not good, right? And so we knew if they were coming in the door for something like a concert, why not get them there and say, hey, why don't you sign up for parent-teacher conferences? And while you're at it, let's update your phone number. Let's get you logged on to Infinite Campus. Oh, and by the way, isn't your kid wonderful? Let's start a conversation around something positive or something before we have to have a negative conversation. Those are the kinds of actions that really seem to be making a difference.
It's really interesting how the arts kind of became the gateway to get those parents and families involved. That's really fantastic. Right. I want to switch gears just one more time, and your role as visual arts curriculum coordinator. We were kind of talking before we got rolling here about kind of how many teachers you work with in that capacity. Can you just kind of share some of the numbers and what you do for teachers behind the scenes in that role?
Absolutely. I work in more than 60 schools. We have about 80 teachers in those schools, K through 12. And a lot of the stuff is delivering professional development that's tailored directly to visual arts teachers. Tomorrow afternoon, I have a PLC with our middle school and high school art teachers. We get together. Our work this time is how do we use a scale in standards reference grading to drive our instruction. I think what we do, one of my, I think, critical roles as a visual arts curriculum coordinator is to look at all of these things, these initiatives that are happening in our district and what we know is good pedagogy, and then helping art teachers look at it through a lens that makes sense for them. I know that a lot of our listeners and viewers have probably sat in the back of an RTI training or a literacy training and thought, wow, I got to make this connection for myself, and guess what? I'm probably not going to do it. My job is to make the connection for people and make it explicitly. This is what this means for you as an art teacher, and this is what it doesn't mean, and this is how we can kind of navigate the district. That's one of my bigger roles. So that's how I serve the art teachers, but I also act as their representative. My wider team is our Office of Academics, and so not only is there a visual arts coordinator, but there's a performing arts coordinator, there's a secondary math coordinator, there's a literacy coordinator, and we all kind of act as a representative body. So when we're making big curriculum decisions or big instruction decisions, like let's move to standards reference grading, we work as a team to develop the materials and the resources and the trainings to develop professional development for our entire staff of, there are over 2,000 teachers in Des Moines Public Schools. So it's a two-way job, you know, like I bring stuff from the district back to the art teachers, but I also bring needs and realities from the art room back to district decisions. And that's where I spend a lot of my work.
Okay, I gotta ask you one more thing, Tim. I promise I'm gonna let you talk here. I'm gonna ask one more and then I'll shut up. So you know, I'm just gonna put a plug in here, Sarah, for you. That have you guys ever like thought about or toyed like with sharing some of the work that you guys have done to like the broader world? Like I'm imagining this PLC that you're having, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want them to be on Periscope so I can watch this, because like this is something that like I feel like I would instantly benefit from, kind of seeing some nuts and bolts of what this looks like. Do you guys share any of the work you do, or are there confidentiality issues with that?
Well, two things are happening. Number one, I'm starting to help co-author a paper about how Des Moines Public Schools in general is rolling out standards reference grading, which is going to be exciting, and that's kind of a broader look. But I'm going to be really honest with you. I may sound really smooth and well-versed when I'm talking about it, but many of the things we do are building the plane as we fly it, and so I don't think we've developed anything that's a little rough-hewn. Does that mean that I don't like to collaborate and get out there? Like I'm a member of some Facebook groups and some things like that where we share. But the process is, a little less formal than probably, I don't know, would be worth sharing. But actually, you've made me think about how much we share our stuff and how much we look outside of our district. It's one of the great things about being a huge district is we do so much in-house that sometimes it kind of gives us a little bit of tunnel vision, and we don't always look. We're really encouraged to farm and mine resources, human resources even within our district, and so sometimes when you're big like that, you get some myopia, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. One thing that you had talked about that I kind of liked was just, you know, all the different ways that you can affect change from the position you're in now as the coordinator. But can you talk a little bit about your transition from being in the classroom into what you do now, and sort of the benefits that you see of the job that you're in currently?
Yeah, so I should tell you, and I actually had this conversation just this week with someone else about I never thought of this career track being possible or even something that I'd be interested in. I think I would be super happy to be working with elementary students or middle school students or high school students learning about art every single day. Yeah. The reason I think that would make me so happy is because that change is directly tangible, and that's probably a little selfish of me, but I can feel that change right away, and I can see it, and I can touch it. I mean, it's right there in front of me. So I think I would be happy to return to the classroom, and I would have been happy to stay right there. But there was a strange series of events that I often think happen in people's lives, and one of them was Turnaround Arts happened, and it was a funny moment. My principal said to me in the spring of our first year, where I had kind of taken on a natural leadership role, just doing it and trying to, like, using my lunch and my plan time and getting into classrooms and helping teachers, and she was realizing really quickly that that was not sustainable, and she said, you know, I think we need to hire an arts integration specialist. And I said, oh, that would be fantastic. Like, let's start to make a short list. And she's like, well, maybe you should do it. Oh, I didn't see that coming, and I wasn't really sure. And so I took a little bit of time to think about it, but just at that moment, the district was looking for a half-time visual arts curriculum coordinator and was willing to make it work with Finley. And funnily enough, my principal said, you know, maybe we should make it a full-time role. And I said, oh, God, I don't think I can fill that. Well, that was instantly wrong. And so that path kind of opened up, which is really strange. And I have to tell you, which I'm sure many teachers who have moved out of their classroom, I was really excited about it until the day that I signed my checkout sheet, and then I cried. And I said, I've made the wrong choice. This is my room, and these are my kids. And I had been in that room for about, oh my gosh, I don't even know, 6, 7 years. And so it was a tough choice. But the trade-off was I knew that I could affect 33,000 students, and I wasn't even sure that over my lifetime of teaching that I would have the opportunity to reach that many students. The other exciting thing was not just reaching 33,000 students, but I could act as an advocate and as a voice and as a support team member for almost 80 teachers, which is a really big deal. And so that was the okay trade-off for me. And are there times when I'm like, oh God, yes, it would be so much easier to bang my head against the wall because a third grader won't do something instead of an adult who should know better? Of course. But it's still the right work, and it's still the same work. It's just attacking it from a different angle. And it doesn't mean I won't go back to the old angle, which right now almost seems like it would be a vacation, which I know all of you starting school think that sounds crazy. But the thing there is the classroom challenges and the challenges with students are challenges I know. Doesn't mean I figured them all out, but they're familiar challenges. The idea of working with adults and at this scale were challenges that were really intriguing because they were challenges that I didn't know yet, and I still don't know. And so both personally and on a wider level, it made sense for me.
Okay. Cool. And then I kind of want to dive in a little bit to sort of your area of expertise, which is all about, standards-based grading. But before we jump in there, can you explain to all of our listeners sort of the difference between standards-based grading and standards-referenced grading?
Sure. So the idea of true standards-based grading eliminates the idea of letter grades. Right? Standards-based grading and a standards-based system, kids move at their own pace according to standards. They keep going, and you report out solely on their measurement against a standard. Standards reference grading is we use the standards as a reference in the end to still deliver a letter grade, mostly because that's what kids need on their transcript to get into college. And so if that's going to really change, if there are schools who are really going to move to that standards-based system, which some are, it's easier in middle school and elementary school certainly because the transcripting looks different. It could happen. It'll come from the top down, probably from schools from post-secondary institutions who could find a way to manage that kind of data and information system, because right now it pretty much looks the same from everywhere. So that's kind of the difference.
That's really interesting. So, because I know it seemed like standards-based grade had a lot of buzz behind it, and I'm hearing more and more standards reference grading. Kind of some details, kind of some semantics, but yeah. So, Sarah, can you talk just maybe a little bit about why you think? Because I think this, and I think we're kind of on the same page that standard reference grading works really, really well in the art room. Am I wrong there? Are we unique in that it's fits really well, or do you think it fits for every discipline?
It fits really well for us because for many, many, many of us, it's the way we've always done business. So it feels familiar, it feels like a good fit. For instance, in the math room where things are sometimes a lot more linear and standards are built on each other, or math isn't always necessarily a spiraling curriculum in the sense that it is in the art room. It's a little harder shift for a teacher, but I think it makes sense in the art room because we very much already live in a world that operates this way by necessity, but also by the way that sometimes things happen in the art room and by the way art teachers approach their curriculum.
So what do you think for people who are kind of thinking about adopting it? What are some of the big obstacles or things that if people are kind of on the fence, what advice would you give them? Those are kind of two different questions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think some of the first obstacle is whatever your reporting system is, right? Because if your reporting system, no matter what, boils something down to one letter grade that doesn't have any information attached to that letter grade, it might not make a difference to your student and their parents because there won't be any change for them. It might make a difference in how you operate and how your students operate in your classroom. That would be key. Another barrier would just be some parent understanding. I think if one of my best pieces of advice is to really think through your audiences and your stakeholders and what kind of information they're going to need, and how you can get that to them. But I think my advice would be to, I think actually, Andrew, you brought it up already, would be to look at some districts who are doing it, because they're out there and they're doing it really well. And there's plenty of lessons to learn from and plenty of lessons to learn what not to do. And I'm going to say right now, even in Des Moines Public Schools, we've learned a hell of a lot of what not to do. And I think those are more, or sometimes even powerful than the people who are getting it right. They're getting it right because they did some things wrong. So don't reinvent the wheel, and do some digging. There's some Facebook groups that are about standards reference grading, and I really think you should dig into some Rick Wormley work, WORMLEI, and some Robert Marzano work, formative assessment and standards-based grading. Those are some kind of primers that can really get you started on the right foot.
Yeah. And then if I can ask you something kind of from the crowdcast, we've had a lot of people writing in with questions just asking about, how you just deal with the sheer volume of grading. Like, it can just get so overwhelming, when you teach 500 or 800 or 1,200 kids. How do you grade? How do you make that grade meaningful when you have just that many kids to do?
Right. So I think what I see often in classrooms is really kind of a lot of over-assigning of work, right? When you look at a 9-month, let's say a 9-month school year, I see teachers who are trying to plan 7, 8, 9 lessons, and what really happens there is you go a mile wide and an inch deep, but you still have to grade a mile wide, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can come up with, over the course of your 9-month school year, 4 really solid, deep units that offer just a couple of pieces of really good evidence of student learning, I think you really reduce your grading. I think we need to think about, rather than quantity of pieces of work or quantity of evidence, really the density of evidence. Like, how good is it, right? What's a really dense piece of evidence that tells me a lot about what students know and can do? And then just do fewer of them. I know that sounds crazy, and there's a lot of people, even in some of my my AOE courses that I teach, talk about the expectation of the quantity of work. But I think whatever public expectation is of your program by your parents or by your administrator, whatever that public expectation of display is, that has to come second to student learning and understanding, no matter what. And if you can make that argument to anybody who wants to tell you, I want to see more work, and I want to see it up in the halls, and I want to see a display every 6 weeks, if you can say, listen, this is why I'm doing it. It's for kids and they're learning. I think that's going to be a powerful argument.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into that a little bit more, actually.
Yeah.
If we're talking about sort of depth of knowledge and these sorts of things, I think a big thing that we can use for guidance there are essential questions. And one of my favorite articles that you've written for AOE was the How to Write Great Essential Questions. So can you talk a little bit about why you think that's important, and sort of how do we do that well as art teachers?
So I think one of the things that actually we struggle with as a content area is connecting our work to quote-unquote real life. Even though our work is real life, we're all living it. Hello, right? But I think that one way that we can connect our work to real life is, instead of asking, how do you make a pot, or how do you use this drawing technique, is the why questions. Not the how or the what, not the lower level recall knowledge, but the why. Why would an artist create a vessel, right? Who am I as artist? How can I affect change by creating some sort of aesthetic piece of work? Those big questions can drive an art program beyond application and to real, true creation, where kids are actually having to connect the work that they do to the world around them. I think if there are any listeners who work in IB schools, can relate to that, where they have the, how do I relate to the world around me, and what are different ways that I can relate to the world around me? Well, right here I'm going to teach you in my classroom how to relate to the world and how the world can relate to you through a visual piece of artwork. So when you're designing those essential questions, if you can really link to what's happening to your classroom, to greater society, to greater contexts, to home, to school, to the world, That's how an essential question can change your classroom. It's got to be provocative. It's got to be open-ended. It's got to be debatable, and there can't be any right answers. It's got to encourage divergent thinking, and that's where that divergent thinking, where you think of moving outward, actually will turn inward and get kids to think about themselves and their place in the world and how they can change the world or themselves to make a better fit.
Okay. Very.
That's a T-shirt right there. Divergent thinking turning in on itself inwards. I mean, like, you got to copyright that and market that, because that's brilliant, and that is really what we do. That, dare I say, not very many other disciplines do at all or well. And yeah, that's when you know an art program's really clicking. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. On that same level, the other way that the arts are, I think, the pinnacle of academic work is that in many other programs, the proficiency piece is the applying the skill. And for us, applying is the low level, creating is the proficiency, and going beyond creation to, like, what's that? Like floating above Bloom's taxonomy somewhere? Yeah. I mean, that's just our expectation. And so often just by that divergent thinking and those essential questions and knowing that creation is just the bare expectation in the art classroom, we're actually maybe the most rigorous of academic pursuits.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say, and then kind of going back to the grading thing real quick, because I know a lot of our listeners are really concerned about, having X number of grades in these weeks, or I need, 2 grades per week, or this many grades per quarter. Okay, and I think a lot of teachers just sort of fall back on, just sort of filler grades. And next week on Tuesday, I think I'm going to have an article published that I wrote about why I hate participation grades and why I hate grading for effort or time on task or work habits and all that. So I was wondering if I can get your opinion, and you can feel free to disagree with me. On what do you think of daily participation points, attendance points, grades like that, and if you don't like them, what are some better sort of formative, quick assessments that are worthwhile that can go in the grade book?
Yeah, so I have to say this is one of the issues that I'm most passionate about, because I think it is not okay to give kids a grade that's mixed in with their academic grade on compliance measures. We cannot afford to confuse what kids can know and do with how they act or behave. Number one, that's not culturally proficient. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of kids for whom our classroom may be the safest space, and in all other parts of their life, they are ignored, shut out, and it feels good to be loud and say what you think in the art classroom. And so something like, like sitting quietly in your seat cannot be a part of a kid's academic grade. First of all, there's no art standard that indicates that it's insane. But what we do is if we combine those really core academic pieces with something like participation or effort, we get some grade fog, right? And so what can easily happen is kids who look good but don't have the academic content, their grades can be inflated. And they can be passed on to more advanced classes, and someone's telling them, you get a B for effort, you get an A for effort, and this kid is thinking, I'm ready for the next level. Pretty soon that kid might get to college and find out, no, I'm not ready. I was told I was because I got a B and an A, but turns out that B and an A was because I was quiet and could sit in my seat. The opposite thing can absolutely happen when we combine academic grades and compliance grades. Kids who might be rowdy, might not look like what they're supposed to look like, who can't play the game of school, but have the academic content, can get overlooked, and their grades go down and down and down, even though that kid can totally do the things you're asking them to do. It's really slippery slope when we combine grades and behavior. So one thing we can do is report them separately. That doesn't mean don't report behaviors. I see all the time teachers put things on rubrics like coming to class prepared, right? Yeah. Or like you said, showing up or turning work in on time, work completion, right? I see things like quantifying the most ridiculous things, like you must have 7 to 10 lines on this paper. What are you going to do with the kid who can do 6? You're really going to mark them down 10%? Really? Because what? They can get 6 out of 7? Right? It's kind of crazy. So what we can do then is report both on the academic grades and let that stand alone. But then it's important enough to put those things. We want kids to behave. We want kids to complete work. We want kids to be responsible. And if we can report those out separately, I think it elevates the importance of both. The other thing that allows us to do is to make interventions where interventions belong. So if that kid needs a behavior intervention, not an academic intervention, we can pinpoint that. If that kid needs an academic intervention but is doing okay on behavior, then that kid doesn't get messed up in a point sheet or something like that.
Yeah.
So my heartfelt vote is that we should never, ever, ever include compliance measures like following directions or coming to school on time in with academic grades. They're both so, so critically important for our kids for the next level, whatever that is, that they must be reported out separately. Now, do we all have in our schools reporting forms that make that possible? Maybe not. But that doesn't mean that we still can't separate those out, and when a parent comes in or an administrator comes in and say, look, this kid is like acing everything in my class academically. Now, in terms of their citizenship or employability skills, it's in the toilet, and we got to talk about what this kid needs, or why Tuesday and Thursday when Dad drops them off they don't perform well, right? It's getting down deeper into behavior assessment rather than mushing them all together and getting one ambiguous grade that doesn't tell anybody anything about where that kid stands, either with behavior or academics.
I love that.
So yes.
Yeah, I love that term, grade fog. We do that so often, and people who dig into standards reference grades are going to see all sorts of things about, right, your kids who learn something or look like they're doing it and playing school well but don't learn it, and sometimes they'll be called the grade grubbers or the credit grubbers, like the kids who just like, tell me what I need for the credit for the grade that I want, and haven't really learned anything. I think I was watching a Rick Wormley YouTube chat, and he kind of talked about the ills of participation grades and how they can do kids a disservice. And one of the things he said that I think rings really true is that if a kid has lousy participation or lousy compliance and doesn't buy in, their work is also probably going to academically suffer. So you're really giving them kind of like double jeopardy. Like I'm docking you points for this, and also your work isn't very good because you haven't really like invested much time or effort into it. So you're also going to get docked for that, and it just seemed like really unfair to kids.
And when you say, even the language you use about points and docking, it turns into a system of currency, which is not what, kids are earning points and grades. It turns into a system of, I do this and so I get this in return, rather than a system of, this is what you've learned and this is where you are on your path of learning, which is a whole different conversation we have with kids. Because right now, when grades go down, and Wormley will talk about this, when grades go down, it's very hopeless. You get a 0 on one thing. How are you going to dig yourself out of a 60-point hole? It's so hopeless. Why would you continue, right? There's a whole different message that says, right now, you're at a 2. You got vocabulary down, and you can tell me processes. I need you to apply those processes to get you up to a 3. Whole different conversation, a conversation that's filled with hope for kids.
Oh, man, that's just so good. And that's so true. Like, I mean, kids, they're smart enough to know, like, when there's no hope and when they can't do something. So, the playing the game thing, I think standards reference grading kind of gets around that, and it really starts to measure authentically what kids know. So, Sarah, that's one of the questions I kind of want to ask you, with choice-based education and authentic art making that we talk about, do you find that standards reference grading is a more authentic way of really measuring what kids know instead of just all this other kind of stuff, ambiguous stuff?
Yeah, let me say that I think for sure it's a more authentic way of reporting. But it can be implemented in instruction just as poorly as any other grading system. You can still have kids work for compliance and have 25 starry nights and still say my kids can connect to context, my kids, right? But when combined with something that's definitely more student-centered and more student choice-based, you're definitely going to get something more authentic. So not only is the action in the classroom on both the adult and the student more authentic, but then reporting that out becomes much more clear and authentic. So an example of that might be we've identified 4 really critical nuggets of learning that teachers report out on. I think that's important to note, and also important when talking about the sheer volume of grades. We ask teachers to report out on 4 things, and that's it, which is much more different than reporting out on 9 different assignments, right? Already that's kind of narrower. But some of my my choice-based classrooms in my district look at what is the proficiency level in those 4 things, right? And then some of the highest levels of thinking is saying, students, I'm going to open up these materials to you. You tell me, how are you going to show me that you're learning, that you're making progress towards this goal? I think that's where the authenticity comes in, is not only when it's reported out in a way that's meaningful, but that kids get to apply their learning in a way that's meaningful and not so teacher-centered, much more constructivist.
That's fantastic. So, we've talked about making grades kind of not punitive and not dealing with compliance and order and obedience. So, sometimes I think one of the big knock from people who aren't really into standards reference grading or look at it with suspicion is that we're missing out on some sort of component of responsibility. We're giving them endless chances, and how does that really talk about the real world? So do you see that as kind of a fair criticism? Is there any weight to that? And if there's not, how do you kind of get around that that thought?
Yeah, I hear that a lot, but if you think about let's say you're 16 years old and you fail the driving test for the first time. They don't say you can only drive on Tuesdays or never again, right? We have lawyers and doctors who are practicing that have failed their bar and their boards and who can now perform surgery on us because we understand that there is the need for redos and retakes, and one time isn't always what kids need. Right now we're on a very factory-based system. Anything you read by Ken Robinson will talk about the history of how our education system got to be the way it is, and that we expect kids to know how to read on November 4th, and where we have kids, it's just maniacal the way we adhere to those dates, and there's some reasons why those structures have been put in place. But the reality is, and I think the one that hit the example that I use all the time is that I have failed students, and I'm not saying giving them an F, I'm saying I haven't been the very best teacher that I could be, or I haven't taught a lesson that totally landed home, over and over and over again, and no one has come into my classroom and said, we're not going to bring in 3rd graders this afternoon because that 2nd grade lesson didn't go so well this morning. No one has ever said that to me. I've always been given another chance to try and get better. I've always, as a teacher, known that I'm going to try and get better. And so I think that to not allow that or give our students that respect and courtesy, the chance to try and get better over and over again, it would be just totally off the mark. Now, does that mean that you get to impose 0 restrictions on how redos and retakes happen in your classroom? Absolutely not. You still have to maintain your sanity. Things like, and I think Wormley has said things like this, like, saying I'm only going to take redos and retakes 2 weeks before our last day of class. That seems reasonable to me. Or to not have kids redo the entire project. Maybe just, I see you you just missed the mark on line here. Can you give me a quick, on this Post-it, another chance at line? It doesn't have to be this big, confusing system where kids are redoing entire paintings and things like that. Redos and retakes are necessary. They can be stipulated, and they can be made a little bit more user-friendly for both the student and the adult in the classroom. No student or adult is going to want to regrade an entire paper or an entire painting or an entire sculpture again. If that doesn't make sense in terms of materials, there are ways to do it without having to go through all of that.
Right. I mean, it's not what artists do. I mean, like, how many times have we made something and it's like, that's okay, but like, you don't want to always invest the time and go back to it. You're kind of on to like the next kind of thing, and that's what I like about the model you've put forward, is there's 4 big components and there's multiple ways that you can prove that a student is proficient in that, and maybe it's this project and maybe it's not this project, maybe it's another project. That sounds really intriguing.
Well, and I think the important thing to remember there also is evidence is evidence is evidence. It often seems like we just grade on the final project, right? And maybe a conversation with a student is a great piece of evidence of where they're at. Maybe a conversation or maybe a drawing with a student who might be an English language learner. They can't write out that artist statement, but boy, can they perform the task. I mean, evidence is evidence no matter how you get it. I think that's really something important to remember. I also think that we do a lot of autopsies on student work and not a lot of health checkups along the way, right? Why autopsy something that you're never going to let kids go back to? Why do we wait till the end to grade something? Why don't we work formatively to make sure that kids are where they need to be by the end of this lesson, not wait and say, oh, I gotcha, and you didn't do this right, but we're not going back. The train's left.
That's so on point, and I had that thought today. I'm doing a project, and there were a number of students I just walked up to and I said, you get it, like you totally understand what we're doing right now, like look at that shading, and they were halfway done. Now we've all had students who have an amazing project and then like 4 days later they just totally like it crashes and burns. And I kind of was thinking like, you know, what if kids started taking photographs of their work at the end of every period, like with their cell phone, like here I was on day 1, on 2, and 3, and here's the process of what I've learned, and it isn't just like, all right, final critique, autopsy time. So
right.
Yeah.
And you know, part of that discussion is also about how we penalize students for early learning, right? Like early on, kids try some value studies and they kind of do it okay, and so they get like a 50%, right? They don't do so great. But then later on in the semester, you do another value study and they get 100%. They got it. But the weird thing about traditional grading is we average those and we say they're a 75%. We don't do that in things like sports, right? Where someone can swim a 500 really slow in 20 minutes, but then they train a little bit and they can swim it in 10 minutes. We don't say they're a 15-minute swimmer. We don't penalize them for being early learners or slow swimmers early on. It's where they are right now. What's the best evidence? What's the most recent evidence? When you defer to that best and most recent evidence, I think that honors the learning process and doesn't penalize kids for starting out not knowing what you're going to teach them, which doesn't make sense.
Totally doesn't make sense. Man, Sarah, you are like just preaching. I'm going to give you a pulpit, give you the mic, because you are just on point right now. I mean, that's so true. It's so stupid to think like, okay, day 1 of Spanish class. Oh, you don't know 1,000 words in Spanish? You get an F. And then the end, it's like, oh, and then averaging that out is just really stupid, you know? It's like that's our job, is to teach kids along the way.
You know, one of my favorite kind of examples we do with one of our PDs is parachute packing, and we show these trend lines of 3 students. One, and the end task is they're going to pack your parachute for jumping out of an airplane, and you got to select which kid you want to pack your parachute. Well, they all average up to 70, but you're really going to want a kid who's trending up and growing at the end. That's going to be the kid who's going to be successful. It's not the kid who is up and down, even though their average is also 70, or the kid who is actually trending down, but their average is still 70. You want to look at most recent and best evidence to figure out who's going to pack that parachute for you.
Awesome.
I don't know if we could fit any more analogies into one episode.
Yeah. I love analogies.
We shouldn't mix them up though. Packing a parachute with swimming and Spanish test, and yeah, probably not good.
All right. Well, Sarah, thank you for all of your wisdom, all of your analogies, and a lot of good discussion starters. But before we get you out of here, with all of our guests, we need to do the lightning round. So 5 quick questions and 5 quick answers. Number 1, I want you to think back to when you were a little kid. Did you have plans on growing up to be a visual arts curriculum coordinator, or was there something else that you wanted to be when you grew up?
No, I actually have my BA in medical illustration. I wanted to be a doctor or an artist, and I couldn't decide. I mashed them together. Bad plan.
Okay, Sarah. We're going out karaoke. What's your song? What do you sing?
Living on a Prayer.
Oh, good choice. Good choice.
I feel like that's a karaoke staple right there.
Yeah, right? The classic. Right. You're classic for a reason.
That's true. Okay, what is the worst gift you have ever received?
The worst gift I ever received was also the best gift I ever received. I had a student who brought me a shingle that they had found walking to school one morning, just like a dirty old shingle, and I said, oh, thanks. And then they said, this is for you because you can make anything beautiful.
Nice.
Oh, man. Awesome. Okay, favorite artist, artwork, or art museum? We'll give you three choices.
Actually, my favorite artwork is at the Des Moines Art Center. It's part of their collection, and it's Ai Weiwei, and I don't know the title of it, which you should know the title of your favorite artwork, but it's a giant pile of ceramic sunflower seeds.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because I think I'm interested in things that are labor-intensive and a collective piece, and the piece is part of the whole, and they're all like hand painted. They are incredible. But one of my favorite artists right now is Kehinde Wiley.
Yes.
My kids connect with him. I connect with him. I think he's doing really cool things and making big statements.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, and then last one. Tell me one thing that is on your DVR right now.
I'm watching Parks and Rec the entire
Nice.
series for like the 4th time.
Oh, excellent.
Funny every time.
Awesome.
All right, well, Sarah, that will wrap it up for us. Thank you so much for being our guest this evening.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for letting me talk.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll see you later.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, Andrew, hit us up with your big takeaways. What do you got from tonight?
Oh, man, so many good ones. I just was taking notes the whole time. I've known Sarah for a little bit now, and she and I kind of can really talk about this stuff. She really hits me in my wheelhouse, and I really get into this stuff. So a big takeaway, I guess, would be how standards reference grading really does take away the sort of punitive and award side of grading. Like, grades are supposed to be neutral. You're not supposed to entice kids with getting a good grade or challenge or punish them with a bad one. And standards reference grading is just like, this is what your kid knows. And we're not going to get into the games of like, they were a good little boy or, not. And this is just straight up what they know. And I really love that part of standards reference grading.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough transition for a lot of teachers who are so used to, grading participation or productivity or whatever else. So, I'm kind of interested, I guess, to see what the backlash on my article is going to be. Because, there is that, is this actually pragmatic? Can you do this in your classroom where you get rid of those types of grades? And I think it is a tough transition. But, since I've made that transition, I feel so much better about not only what I'm grading, but my kids' learning as well.
Mm-hmm. So you feel so you have kind of transitioned to a more standards-based grade or standards reference grading system?
Yeah, I think it is a lot about standards references, but it just for me was about eliminating just those sort of classroom management grades. Like those issues are separate from what you should be grading. And if you're grading on participation, maybe you need to get your kids a little more motivated. Like if that's a punitive measure, like, oh, this kid's not working today, I better downgrade him. That doesn't work for me. I don't know how you justify that, I guess.
Yeah, I to self-confess, I did that the first year or two that I was teaching because I kind of was like, well, if I don't do that and I don't grade on effort and participation and I just grade on what they know, some kids will get an A and some kids will get horrible grades because some of us are just naturally better at this stuff. And then I kind of realized, number one, I didn't like doing grades for hundreds of kids every week. I mean, that was kind of silly and stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I just think there's a better way to think about how you grade what they've learned and what they know than just you're already good or you're not good. It's kind of the process. So it's kind of an art, I think, to authentically grade kind of what they've learned. And I think Sarah hit it well when she said, get those essential questions down pat, get them tight, and then also simplify what your standards are. You're not having to grade multiple different things on multiple different projects. It's like these are the 4 or 5 things that we're always looking for, and then it's compile all that evidence for it.
Yeah, for sure. And then one other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, I would have liked to dive into this a little more, but we need to get to all that grading stuff. But back at the beginning of the interview, she talked about all of her ideas with arts integration, and it kind of tied in for me because the last couple of months I've been teaching the AOE class on connecting art to the Common Core, and just all those connections that are available to us, as we work with other disciplines, and a lot of the English language arts stuff she's talking about, all of those great connections that are out there for us. I think that's something that, we can dive into a little bit more. And I would have enjoyed talking, about that. And, she brought up a really good point where, and that's kind of one of the things we try and balance, where we have all of these wonderful connections that we can make with art, but at the same time, we still need to worry about art for art's sake. And, you can focus on those connections, but you still need to let art have those inherent qualities that really benefit our students. So, like I said, that's something I would have liked to have chatted about a little bit more, but, I think it's an important point to bring up.
Dude, don't let me steamroll you and talk about the stuff I want to talk about in standard reference grading. Stand up for yourself, Tim. Come on.
No, this was a grading-based talk tonight, so I felt like we had to jump in there.
And I gotta say, when we have these T-shirt moments where I'm just like, oh man, we got to put that on a T-shirt or a slogan or a billboard. Sarah really stated what we do so well, and it's that like divergent to then personal, which is just fantastic. And just today I took my kids on a field trip, and I was kind of able to show them like some work that was a little bit provocative, a little more than just like pretty pictures. It had some meaning. I said, why would the artist do this? And let's talk about meaning, and let's talk about some big ideas and really some essential questions. And I could already see them thinking about, here I am seeing this work. Why would anyone make this? And now what do those big ideas have to do with the world that I have? So I thought that was just, it all made sense. It all came full circle.
Yeah, very cool. I'm going to say, anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up here?
Nope. I mean, maybe we'll just have to add Sarah to our list of people that we want to have on again, so you can kind of ask her some more questions about art for art's sake.
Yeah, very cool.
But hey, that's another time. So for now, definitely you guys, after the show, check out my Twitter feed, Tim's Twitter feed, The Art of Ed, and hashtag AOE to kind of see some links, some connections to the talk that we had tonight. And we'll be on chat roll on the Crowdcast for a few more minutes afterwards. So if there's some questions or suggestions you have for us, just let us know.
Yep. And once we wrap it up here, the show will be available on the AOE Live page, and by tomorrow it should be able to be downloaded on iTunes, the podcast app, and Stitcher for Android users. Listen to it on your drive, at home in the evening, or even during your planned time. I am Tim Bogatz, and on behalf of Andrew McCormick and everyone at The Art of Ed, thank you for joining us on AOE Live.
Yep. See you later. Goodbye, everybody.